Okay, welcome everyone. For those of you whom I don't know, my name is Sarah Hemmel, Professor of Modern and Contemporary Art here at Sarah Lawrence, and I'm really excited to welcome everyone tonight to this panel on global early modern art history.
This approach befit the general situation in Manila around 1591. This was 2 decades after the Spanish soldier and government official Miguel López de Legazpi established a permanent colony by a combination of force and diplomacy in the existing polity of Maynila. At this point, at least according to a letter sent by the Bishop Domingo de Salazar in 1588, the population of Manila was comprised almost entirely of 2 kinds of people. First, indigenous people, mostly Tagalogs, living outside the city proper. And second, Chinese diaspora, many of whom came from Guangdong, and they lived in their own area, known as the Parian.
So urban environments of modernity depended on underground structures. In 19th century Paris, for example, we had galleries enclosing water systems, gas lines, and steam pipes were tourist attractions for those who wished to see the subterranean infrastructure of modern life above. So here I'm showing you a so-called bateau mouche underground. And on a global scale, telegraphic oceanic cables encased with rubber harvested from Southeast Asia, we're calling Jennifer's talk, Southeast Asia, were likened by some authors to an invisible technology.
And ask if anyone would like to ask a question. If you would like to ask a question, you can come to the microphone here or there. We have 2. Don't be shy. Oops. What happened?
Well, thank you very much. It was really an extraordinary series of talks and very illuminating. I was interested in the conversation and the kind of language around the Brazilian objects.
I just began laughing. So I think that this is one of the fault lines of early modern art history, is that how can we actually, I don't want to use the word recuperate, but actually, and I'm very careful about using the word grasping, but how can we actually somehow be present with language, given the fact that language in and itself has a very violent categorizing impulse?
And just to think that anybody here can see is that Rhonda Castle has done this really nice little sort of mini exhibit at the Metropolitan Museum about the galleons. Right?
Yes.
Right.
Geez.
Yeah, yeah. And it's and it was really amazing because it was like the only one of these mini exhibits around the museum that wasn't embarrassingly reductive and stupid. Oh, sorry.
Some cute ones.
What? Sorry. It's really smart.
So let's continue the conversation next door for reception. But before we leave, let's give a warm Sarah Lawrence thank you to all of our panelists.
Good evening and welcome. Welcome. Welcome, everyone. I'm Christina Camardella. I'm the Director of Alumni Relations at the college, and I am delighted to welcome you tonight for this conversation with Pulitzer Prize-winning playwright, screenwriter, lyricist, and member of the class of 1992, David Lindsay Abair.
Thank you. Thanks for coming, everyone. And thank you, Kenneth, for being here, and thank you, David, for coming back to Sarah Lawrence. And it's just a chance to have a little conversation, check in with you. I know you were here with Shirley Kaplan, I don't know how many years ago. My COVID memory is a little weak. And then you came back for the summer seminar maybe 5 years ago. And yeah, just you're doing amazing stuff. But I thought it might be useful for the students to walk through, you know, your introduction to playwriting, where it began. You were in South Boston. I forget, you talked before, but did you start writing in plays in high school?
Yeah, I grew up in, as you mentioned, in South Boston, which is a very working class neighborhood in Boston. And when I was 11, I got a scholarship through the Boys and Girls Club of Boston to Milton Academy, which was this, fancy prep school out in the suburbs. And so I would get on the train every day and go to the fancy school, starting in 7th grade. And the tradition was in ninth grade at that school, every ninth grade did a ninth grade play. And our play was this crazy musical by Christopher Durang called History of the American Film. And I loved that play, and it was so wacky and absurd and was totally my taste. And then in 10th grade, someone said, oh, we should do a 10th grade play. Because generally what happens after ninth grade, you just get dumped into the rest of the department. But someone said, we should write a 10th grade play, and you're the funny one, so you should write it. And I had never written a play before. I liked plays. But then I wrote a play in 10th grade, which was essentially a ripoff of a Christopher Durang play. And then I wrote a play in 11th grade, and that was a ripoff of a Tina Howe play. And then I wrote my first musical my senior year, which was just terrible and should have been ripped off from some, but anyway. But I did all of that thinking that I was going to be an actor, and I came here still thinking that I was going to be an actor. And so I did a lot of acting here, but if you know anything about the theater department here, you can take other classes. And so I said, well, I'd like to fill out my program by doing some playwriting because I still like it. And that's what I did. I started writing here with Stuart Spencer, who's right over there, my playwriting teacher, who, the greatest teacher, not the greatest student. But I loved it so much and continued to do it, and it came easily to me. And after I graduated from Sarah Lawrence, I didn't keep acting, but I did keep writing plays. And I kept doing that afterwards, and you know, after a few years out of Sarah Lawrence, I had a full-time job, and I applied to the Juilliard program as a playwright, and they let in 4 playwrights a year. And it wasn't really until I got into Juilliard that I thought, oh, I don't know, maybe this playwriting thing is gonna work out. So that was it. And soon after Juilliard, I got my first production at Manhattan Theater Club, Fuddy Mears, and you know, there we go.
Okay, let's get the audience in, but I want to ask Stuart Spencer a question. Sorry, Stuart. What was David like as a student? When did you notice that he had genuine talent?
He's still thinking about it. He's not sure yet.
Was he really a mediocre student at times, or what? You know, what was the real deal like?
Well, David was. Oh, hi. David was. Somebody once described Tchaikovsky as a student. That every time he came in, it just always felt like he put kind of everything into it, and that it was supercharged. Tchaikovsky and David are stylistically quite different, but in his goofy, zany, weirdo way, that was what David was like. It was always, every time he came in with something, you just thought, my God, where did it come from? It was sort of, it's not that it worked necessarily, it wasn't that it was, you know, great writing, but it was always very true to his sensibility. And he was always enormously confident in that. And the you know, it was a fount. It just kept coming. I don't know. You didn't present every week in that class, did you?
I don't remember. I don't think we could have, right?
No.
Yeah.
But it felt like that.
Yeah.
Because you were so productive.
You're being very generous. I was not the best student. I did a lot, and I certainly had enthusiasm and, you know, some cockiness. But Stuart Spence, like, is such a good structuralist and knows how things are built. And he literally wrote the most brilliant playwriting book, and you should read it if you have any interest. But I actually resisted it as a student. I was so spiteful. I'm like, oh yeah, that's not new. And it really was years after, honestly, when I started writing screenplays, I was like, I guess I got to find out about this structure stuff.
And to be fair, that book was not written for another 10 years after you were in my class. So
Right.
You couldn't have consulted it.
But you
if
still
wanted
knew
to.
it all. You were still saying all that stuff. Yeah, you were. I remember because I remember disagreeing with you.
I got better.
Can you talk about your experience working with directors, plays and screenplays? And do you feel like you lose control when it's a screenplay? And how is that whole process working with directors?
Directors in theater, not so much. You're in charge. They can't change anything without your permission. That's not to say that directors in theater don't, you know, make you crazy and overstep and try to get you to do things that you might not want to do. But my experiences have been really great with theater directors who have been really respectful and wanted to tell the story that I wanted to tell. Directors in film, really nice people. But they're in charge, and you are there to serve them, especially if you're making a studio movie, and not just the director, by the way. They're hardly the worst of the bunch. It's usually the studio and the executives with lots of opinions that are seldom about storytelling. And so if you want to do film, you really have to know, like, you will be paid well and you will have great health insurance, but you generally will not be very happy because story is not at the forefront of their agenda, as much as they might say that. It's a miracle that good movies are ever made, honestly. That's my experience. But look, if they're like the writer-director combo, then you have way more power, but still not as much as you should. But if you're just a writer, then you're screwed. Sorry, that was a very cynical answer. But I'll tell you, how about this? Just to end on a good note. Rabbit Hole was turned into a movie. Nicole Kidman said, hey, do you think it's a movie? And I said, yes. By that point, I had done a few movies. And I said, but only if I get a say in this, and I get a say in that, and you're not going to hire another writer to rewrite all of my stuff. Like, you actually have to want to tell the story that I want to tell. And if not, no hard feelings. I don't need a bad version of a play that I like. Like, I'll write a bad version of somebody else's book or something, you know, but this is mine. And she said, absolutely, we can do that because we don't really have much money to offer you. And so that movie, Rabbit Hole, was made for less than $4 million. Every actor worked for minimum, and it was shot in 28 days. So because there was money and no time, there was no room for anybody to get in my way or like say what they always say was like, you know what might be better? You know what might be interesting? And that's usually like, that's the death of whatever the impulse was to tell your story. So we never got to that point for Rabbit Hole. And that's, you know, at least it's a movie that I can look at and like, yep, for better or for worse, that's mine. I did that. And then there are some movies that I sit through, and it's like if you're an extra in a movie, you sort of watch and like, oh, there I am over there, and oh, if you bend, you can see a little bit of me over there. That's often what happens for me.
I guess I'm curious if you have, I don't know, like a specific story of seeing an actor in one of your plays or productions give life to a character in a way that really maybe surprised you in a good way, getting to see it come to life.
Yes, this is my favorite story. I'm glad you asked this question. Because in my play, Good People, Frances McDormand played it on Broadway to perfection. Honestly, I thought, that's it. That is the play that I wrote. I will never see it bettered. That is the golden standard. And then I saw production at Steppenwolf. This wonderful, wonderful, brilliant actress, Marianne Mayberry, who has since passed away, actually, who was in the Steppenwolf company forever, but had always played supporting roles and smaller roles, and this was her first giant lead in a play. And I sat down, and she played the first scene so unhinged. Like, she was so desperate, not crazy, wacky, but there was just the scariness about her. She gets fired in the first scene, and if she gets fired, she gets kicked out of her house, and she has an adult child with special needs, and you just felt that desperation in a way that was so heightened. And I thought, well, where are you going to go from here, Marianne? What the hell is happening? But because she was so heightened, I understood entirely, in a way that I never had in the next scene, why she says, I got to go meet up with that guy I know from high school who's now a doctor and might be able to get me a job. Like, it launched her into the next scene and explained the trajectory of those scenes in a way that I had not heard before. And by the way, she totally maintained that heightenedness, that feral quality almost, that was not better than Fran McDormand, but equally good in a completely different way. And it was illuminating for me to see, I know this, I know the play, I know how it should be. And to have an actor show it to you in a completely different way, fascinating. And this is a slightly different version of it. Again, Good People, Fran McDormand did not care if the audience liked her, did not care. And I loved feeling that in the audience, if the audience were like, oh, this poor woman, like, oh, but she's doing something really bad, and like, oh, but of course she's doing something bad, but now I don't know, that's problematic. So I loved that prickliness that I felt from the audience. I saw another production with a really wonderful actress that did not want to be disliked. And so she took all the edge out of it, and the play still worked. It was just it was a funnier play. It was like a broader play. It was more comedy of manners. And it still held together and hit all the things, but I lost that thing that made it a little more dangerous. And so, again, a totally valid organic choice that actress made, but it redefined what the play was tonally.
All right, let's give David Lindsay-Abaire a big hand.
Thank you, guys.